Good morning to everyone out there. It is about 6 in the morning right now. It is Saturday, June 14th. It's been nice days. I'm in the mood to do one of these. I have not done one of these in a long time, actually. I've been spending a lot of time in my studio recording like the Bible and Project 2025. I've been putting a lot of energy into that I have not been able to sit down and do any other projects that I have in my mind. So I finally found this one to do today. I'm going to try to get back on track and catch up with all the stuff I have next to me on my little project table that I haven't done in a while. So, again, because I'm doing those projects has not meant that I've stopped reading. In fact, I'm actually reading more now than I used to before. The weather, like I said, is very nice outside. It's spring. We're now just starting to turn into summer. And I've gone outdoors with some of my reading now. Got a front porch that's actually set up real nice, and I've been taking advantage of it. You know, my wife set up the nice little chairs on the porch, the rocking chairs and everything, a little table next to you. And we actually even had a little landscaping done recently, so we cleaned up the front yard. It looks very nice. It's very open. And, I have a nice New Jersey suburban neighborhood. It's a nice little spot of serenity. The perfect location to actually sit down, crack open a book, and go through the pages, being a nice, comfortable outdoor area. And, in this neighborhood, a lot of kids. People are constantly walking in their exercise. They're walking their dogs around. Kids on bikes just playing. In fact, there's a little pond across the street. People come and fish. A little catch and release. It's fantastic. Very, very quaint. And even in the mornings, my son gets picked up on the bus, and I work from home. So I'll go out there with him. I'll take my phone, pop on a little like Mario World type video, which he just adores. He's in kindergarten. And he'll watch that while I absorb a few pages. Fantastic stuff. In fact, I tell you what, I've got 5 other books next to me that I want to do reviews on. And I just hadn't sat down and done the notes and done the recording. I have 2 splatter westerns, 2 Dresden Files, and 1 book from an author I just hate reading at this time. So you'll see more about that in the future. But I had 5 others ready to go to investigate, but somehow this one had to cut the line. And I just finished reading this the other day, on Thursday, and I'm ready to discuss it with you here today, as the cuckoo clock goes off in the background. So without much further ado, this is Rage, written by Richard Bachman, who is the pseudonym or the pen name of Stephen King. It's from Signet Books, and originally was published back in September 13th, 1977. So, I think originally I had read this book back in like my high school days. Back in high school, I was a huge fan of Stephen King. I got all his work. In fact, I still even have kind of like a whole shelf with him on it because I haven't gotten rid of his books or anything like that. And with the exception of his ongoing Dark Tower series, that big fan attitude, the opinion I had of him, kind of fell off like after I graduated college. Wasn't there with me anymore. Wasn't a big Stephen King fan. I had to go read his next work, whatever else. And, I fell under the spell and the imagination of the man's writing. But I started getting tired of the 800-page tomes and being disappointed by the endings. So, it was not worth my time for that any longer. And it's funny, that's actually kind of a widely held opinion about Stephen King. And from what I understand, I think he knows it. A couple years ago, Hulu came out with a 2-season show called Castle Rock. It was 2018 to 2020. And it was a decent show. It explored some of Stephen King's characters that he wrote about And there was a heavy emphasis on Annie Wilkes, who was the nurse, the antagonist in Misery. And you kind of get backstory of her a little bit. And there's other characters who kind of like make appearances, and these characters are just a little bit different from the characters you actually knew that he had written in the past. But it's a very intriguing 2-season show. It actually even ends. It's not like it wasn't renewed for a 3rd season. It actually has a conclusion to it, which is fantastic. And there's tons of Easter eggs in the show. Little things that fans can pick up and be like, oh, he's mentioning, Pennywise from It, or he's mentioning that other character and yada yada. But in the show, there's a small scene where he's acknowledging that he doesn't very end well. Stephen King is one of those people that he's got so many works, so many short stories, so many full-length novels, that a lot of them have made it to screen, to TV, or to movies. And Stephen King likes to cast himself as a role in them. Usually a very, very small cameo, maybe has one line of dialogue. Almost like Alfred Hitchcock does. Alfred Hitchcock, back in the day, used to throw himself as little cameo roles in his films. Generally not speaking parts. He was a person in the background that you see walk through or reading a newspaper or whatever else. But, people who are popular and have the power to will do this. And glory to them for doing it. So, in Castle Rock, Stephen King plays, I think it's like a store owner. And one of the characters come into the store, and the character himself is a writer. And Stephen King is huge on making stories about a writer character. It's almost become a trope in his works. And the writer's talking to the store owner, looking for something or whatnot. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm Mr. X, the author. And King's character actually makes the comments like, can never stay getting into him, he doesn't write good endings, or something to that effect. So he was like making fun of his own shortfalls in his own show. So, but for me, after a while, I just kind of fell out of touch with his works, and it is what it is. What's ironic, though, is this is like the 55th episode of me doing book reviews, and it's the 3rd entry I've done for Stephen King. One was a book of short stories, and I actually, enjoy short stories, so that was fine. And then the second one was a review on The Green Mile, mainly because I wanted to do the review on John Saul's Blackstone Chronicles, which was done in the same serialized 6-book kind of thing. So I wanted to get The Green Mile out there to talk about Blackstone. But now I'm on Rage, and at this point, with 55 episodes of this, Stephen King's about 5.5% of the reviews I've done. So, okay. Now, what is it about Rage that gets to skip the line and trump the 5 other books that I've already had read before this one? Sorry. As I said, I probably read this one at this point at least 30 years ago, maybe even longer. So long ago that the content of Rage was well into obscurity in my mind. If you had asked me a week ago to tell you what it was about, I would not be able to say a word, because I didn't remember. But recently, I was coming across an article on, I think it was like the Yahoo Trending or whatever else, or maybe one article begat another article, as internet searching actually does. Internet browsing better. I wasn't searching for anything. And I saw an article about how Stephen King actually had a little bit of shame regarding this book. And I was like, oh, that's odd. I know there's kind of like a woke thing going on where some people might go back to old roles and be like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that back then, even though it made them popular. What's her name? Molly Ringwald has been doing that within the last decade. She's going back to the John Hughes films that made her a name. And she's like, yeah, shouldn't have been in that kind of movie because it's just not right. And I hate hearing those stories. They're utterly tragic. Um, and again, it's looking at the past with current day's eyes, and it just doesn't do anyone any good. No one needs to hear someone else's shame. So I heard that Stephen King had shame on this novel. I'm like, what the hell is this? So then as I'm reading, I learned that now Rage is an out-of-print book. They will not produce this anymore. So naturally that piqued my interest. And I said to myself, I have it on my shelf. Maybe I'll dust it off, reread it, and see what the hubbub was about. Okay? Now granted, Stephen King's a very, very popular author. There's probably millions of copies out there. Okay? It's not like they've all been destroyed, right? You can find them wherever used books are sold. You can probably get it in a used bookstore, collectible stores, or like an eBay type of online place. You can pick up a copy. I do know I've seen a bunch of paperbacks that were out there, and on eBay they're selling for like $50. So, and that is whether it's a standalone, whether it's a first edition, or whether it's part of like a collection of Richard Bachman stories, like the Bachman books. They're available and they're selling for that kind of price. But then the question is, why? Why is he ashamed of his book now? Why is it out of print? Well, to get right to it, Rage is a story about a high school kid who brings a gun to school. He brings it into his class. He does shoot and kill 2 teachers and holds the classroom hostage for the morning. Okay? I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But it brings us into the realm of the mind of a person who's a school shooter. Okay? It is a fictitious novel, but school shootings are a sensitive topic. They happen way too often here in America, and it's typically a topic that no one is for. You have people that no one wants a school shooting, but they'll talk about the right to hold guns, whether pro or anti. Here in America, we have a vast number of very publicized school shootings that have taken place. It's very common when you're talking about school shootings that you will mention what happened in Columbine in Colorado. As I take my notes for this recording for you today, I'm realizing that went down on April 20th, 1999. That's when Columbine occurred. And that was 26 years ago. So it is still a fresh topic of conversation even after half of my lifetime has passed. In the same breath, when I talk about Columbine, typically Sandy Hook in Connecticut also comes up in conversation. That was December 14th, 2012. Okay, 13 years ago. And unfortunately, since that time, if the AI results on a search I did online on Google are true, there's been over 420 school shootings since Columbine in the U.S., with over 160 of them happening since the COVID-19 pandemic. So you figure we were indoors for most of 19 and probably 20. Let's say we go back to schools in 21. Schools letting out here in 25. We're only talking about 4 years or so, 160 shootings. Okay. And I'm sure they range in variation from one gun, one bullet to classrooms being killed. So they classify a number with 160 just in the last 4 years. So it's about school shootings. They happen, it's topical, even though this book came out in 1977. What happened with this one, with Rage? If you want to believe the Wikipedia search on this, there was a number of lone gunman type school shootings that occurred between 1988 and 1997. And when these occurred, Rage was a novel that the shooters might have had in their locker, had at home, or just part of a collection. Okay, in one case, there was a boy in Kentucky who had actually wrote an essay about the book in his English class, and got like a C grade, which somehow sparked him to go on to his other endeavors. In some instances, these shootings, this book was done as an inspiration for the shootings. Um, Now, in some of them, the article on Wiki I've read, that is, some of the people were really into the story and actually took inspiration for it. But others might have just been that the shooter was an active reader, an avid reader, and it might have just been among the collection. It's not like there's a bunch of books on the shelf and then there's a holy shrine to this one. You know what I mean? I'll put the link down below if you want to read more up on this yourself. But after the 1997 shooting in Kentucky in December of 1997, that's when Stephen King started to take focus that some people are reading the book and trying to do something about it. So he called up his publisher, Signet, and asked them to stop printing new editions of the book. And they concurred. Now, granted, he's got so much out there, he's got so much money. One book out of print is not going to kill a Stephen King or his bottom line. And not to mention, it's been so much time, even the publishers have already made many, many dimes on this as well. So they said, that's a good thing. I'm fine with it. And later on this topic, I think Stephen King wrote, he wrote some kind of essay called Guns that discusses the topic of guns and shootings and yada. So, and all the proceeds for them, I think, went to some anti-gun cause. So, that's what sparked my interest to get back into this one. Out of print, I owned it. What was it about? What's the story? So, that's what I'm sharing with you, how I got here. Now for the actual book review aspect of this, after 17 minutes of talking. So, what is it about? Well, for starters, it's a short one. It's like 130 pages. And many of the pages, it's almost done like an epistemology, whatever. It's like him writing letters over the thing. So it's almost done in a very short way. So even some of those chapters aren't even long. There might be one-page chapters with a lot of space in the bottom. I mean, 1977, this is early in his career. And these are back in the days where King was short and concise. The stories that came out then were much better, I think, than the ones that came out now. But you're introduced to the main character. His name is Charles Decker. And you're catching him just absent-mindedly in the beginning of the school day in an algebra class, and he's looking out the window. He sees the nice lawn of the school and a squirrel scurrying about, and he's just concentrating on this squirrel. Doesn't care about the lesson or anything like that. And he then gets a call through the intercom or whatever else saying, please come to the office. So he meanders down the hall. He's got an upset stomach. He's eating Ritz crackers and such. And he finally gets to the principal's office, waiting on the bench for his turn. And he sees one of his father's hunting buddies sitting next to him. This guy's like a school textbook salesman, and he's there trying to sell his next book. But you start to see that the guy sitting next to this kid is visibly starting to get uncomfortable sitting next to him. He's a high school boy. What's to be afraid of? This grown-ass man is afraid of him. He starts absent-mindedly looking at the pages so he wouldn't look at him. He starts sweating. He starts fidgeting. So you start getting a glimpse of, hey, who is this kid that he causes this, that he's even called to the principal to begin with? And while they're sitting there, Charlie has a little bit of flashback of a time that he even saw this guy on a hunting trip he went on with his father when he was a really, really young boy. And everyone was just around the campfire and drinking and guffawing and whatnot. So there's a flashback type scene that shows that Charlie knows this guy. This guy knows Charlie. And he gets a little glimpse of, hey, what's to come? As we move forward and he's in the principal's office, we learn that just recently, Charlie Decker had assaulted one of his other teachers with a pipe wrench, smacked him across the head, put him in the hospital. So there's talks of like expert findings and psychology reports trying to say that, Charlie wasn't really in his right mind when this episode went down, and he was young enough to be a minor to not be criminally charged for it, because back then they didn't do that too often. And even the reports would say something about how he wouldn't take accountability for his actions, or he doesn't really understand what he did, and that's why he's still allowed in school. And then during this talk to, Charlie starts, you start seeing how clever he is, and he starts trying to manipulate and twist the principal. He starts asking questions back to him. He starts taking the conversation into a territory that is lewd, that's graphic, that's sexual in nature. He starts like accusing, the principal of like doing things to young girls, or how does he like to masturbate, that kind of stuff. Like, he really gets on the principal's nerves. Sickly, perverted things. These are the things he's trying to like tell the principal he's into. And why don't you just admit it? Why don't you just tell me what you're into? Get it off your chest. So the principal then decides to, just flip out. And he's like, listen, get out of here, go to your locker, turn in your textbooks, and get off the grounds. You're expelled. So now we can get the party started. All right. Charlie goes back to his locker. You get more into his mind. He sets fire to his locker, closing it. Retrieves his father's gun that he had in his locker that he took a while ago. He's been carrying it into school for days now. So he's been planning what he's trying to do for a while. While his locker's on fire, the history teacher he runs into shoots and kills him right then and there. He goes back to the algebra class he was in the morning, decides to shoot the algebra teacher, which in the cover, that's why you're seeing like a pair of legs off to the side here. He's in control. Dead teacher. Mrs. Underwood, I think her name is. And then he decides to just keep the class there because he wants to have a little discussion. And this is what, as he puts it in his words in the story, it gets on. He's going to get it on. It's time to get it on. It says it all over and over again. So then what kind of happens after that? Obviously there's a fire in the locker. The fire alarm goes off. The fire department comes in there. And the loudspeaker's like, everyone leave, and he's like, no, we're staying here. Obviously, you tell it to a teacher, not going to know what the hell you're talking about. So it's a whole thing like, I'm in control, we're staying, you guys leave, it's just in my locker, it'll be put out in a minute. And then he's got his compatriots, so to speak, in the classroom. Boys and girls his own age. Boys and girls that kind of know him or know of him. And it just starts going through a deconstruction of high school kids in the 70s. The popular pretty boy is in the class. There's like the slut girl, the pristine virginish girl, the fat boy whose name's like Piggy, of course. There's a whole roster of personalities that rounds out the classroom. It's almost like take, blanking, The Breakfast Club, and take that little representation of everyone and throw them in the classroom as well, which does happen in classrooms. It's not like it was manufactured that way. And as you're reading through the novel, the discussions of the individual people or their problems or his problems or what have you, it kind of does evolve organically. You're kind of taken along for the ride. A lot of it centers on this pretty boy who's, in his mind, he's going to try to be the hero and get the gun from him or rescue the class and going on there. But he's got a past as well. Like, he used to be a star football player for the first 3 years of high school. And then for some reason, he just quit. And no one really knew why. They do hash that out later on because Charlie's like, hey, tell me why you did it. And then someone else would chime in, I think I know why. And it kind of like grows from there. We even see Charlie hold court, so to speak, when two of the girls, like the pristine girl and the slut girl, have at it. And he gets them to come in front of the classroom, puts 2 circles in the floor, has them each stand in it, like face to face, and has each one kind of like give their argument. And one would yell at the other and the other one would yell back one by one, but Charlie would say, okay, after you're done talking, slap her. And the other one, rebuttal with a slap. And they would just go back and forth. Almost like those professional slap fights that you see, which are hysterical to watch. Don't know why people would do it, but they're hysterical to watch. Discussions of sex are happening in this classroom. Who's had it? Who hasn't? What was it like? Did you do it with the popular boy? That kind of stuff. There's even one of the kid Piggy has a very cheap mother, and he gets into his own past in darkness and his frustration and his own rage as it is as well. So it's pretty interesting. And even Charlie goes into depth on that hunting trip that he had when he was younger. The one where he saw the guy in the office who was selling the textbooks. And they really harp on that as a very telling backstory of Charlie. Charlie gets to see something about his father on that trip, which might help define his worldview from then on. And it comes back to that trip pretty often throughout the 130 pages of the story. And somewhere around this, and I'm going to say this wrong, but I'm going to be trepidatious as the words come out of my mouth. There's a pseudo blaming on the parents and the upbringing that I think King wants to try to draw out. Okay? But he doesn't seem very convinced about the argument himself. To me, it almost kind of felt like he wanted to go there, but at the same time, simultaneously, I had the feeling that wasn't the point. So there's a touch on why would people bring guns and shoot teachers and whatnot in school, or even shoot classmates, trying to come up with a reason, but the reason's all in the shooter's mind. Does it really stem from not being loved and being hit? It tries to delve into that to a certain extent. I just don't know if he had a conviction to actually do it like that. Yeah. So, as we're seeing this novel, besides flashbacks and stories that people are telling, there actually is a mechanism that Charlie can talk to, like, the outside world. And the thing is that there's a PA intercom in the classroom, like most classrooms have, but it actually has a little switch that you can flick that allows the classroom to talk back. So a principal or a police officer or whatever would get on the intercom and talk to Charlie, and Charlie would respond when he wanted to and would flick it on and off as necessary. So therefore you have that dialogue is still happening on like a negotiation level, and you get to see more of Charlie's demands as that happens. So that's what the story is about on its 30,000 feet look down on it. Looking down on it from a height, not looking down on it like, this sucks. So like I said, overall, it's an early Stephen King work. Like I mentioned, the earlier work is better than the later stuff. At a certain point, I think Stephen King was being paid by the inch. So he was putting 750 to 1,200 page books out there, one after another. And I actually own the 4-part Bachman books edition. This is the one I have on my shelf or whatever else. This actually collects his first Richard Bachman books that he had there. And you see here, it's Rage, which is this one here. The Long Walk, soon to be a movie coming out later in September this year. In fact, I have an IMDB link I'll throw down below if you want to see more about that one. Road Work, which is interesting about, again, there's guns in there as well, but it's about a guy who, I think his wife dies of cancer, and he just finds out that his house is about to be demolished for a road bypass coming through. And this is how he reacts to that situation. And The Running Man, very popular. Arnold Schwarzenegger had a loose adaptation of this story as well. But these were all Richard Bachman stories. This one here, by the way, is just my little prop for this. It's actually just a cover over another book of the same size. This is Casino Royale, which is like a small James Bond book. Very short, 144 pages. By the way, if you're ever interested, how's this for a great ending to a book? Okay, James Bond, by the way. And he goes, "Yes, damn it," I said. "Was. The bitch is dead now." So, that's my edition of the book. Overall, this is a decent enough story. Okay? And in rereading it, again, I'm 50 years old. It's a little difficult at this time in my life for me to connect, to see through the eyes of a teenager when I'm 50. And I've had my experiences, and I'm far beyond what was then. It's the same way that if someone today at this age would go back and try to like rewatch maybe the old Disney shows that made the crazy girls and boys that are out there popular today. You can't go back and watch a Saved by the Bell or Beverly Hills 90210 when you get older, because you can't connect as much. It might bring you back with the nostalgia of it, but as far as enjoying it, I don't think that's much. I mean, hell, I've had to actively avoid going back and going to rewatch like the old Thundercats cartoons and watching them these days, because I just know it's going to ruin my childhood if I do that. I'll leave whatever memories I have alone and try not to revisit it. So, me getting into a high school shooter's head when he's a teenager, I'm too removed from that to find the enjoyment. Now, I did read it when I was in high school. So at the time, I'm sure it did have an effect on me better than now, to the point that I have it on my shelf and I haven't gotten rid of it or thrown it to a used bookstore. So, there you have it. Thanks for sitting here with me. Like I said, we're a little over 32 minutes right now. I hope this was enjoyable to you. I hope I've given you some background. You have something to mull upon. Like I said, you can find these books out there if you look for it. Some of them you might have to pay a little money for, but, that's what you do. I'm sure, they're probably not available in libraries, but you can take a look, because Stephen King being very popular, it does keep the circulation going, but you never know. With banned books and such, maybe because of the subject matter, it's not available. You can always get it at used bookstores. People have copies. They're out there. So, I'm going to let you go. Again, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you as soon as possible. I actually have my next book already prepped. I did it last night. Wife was away out to dinner. Kids were kind of doing fine by themselves. So I'm going to knock out another one, possibly right now. All right. Take it easy now. Bye-bye.